Talk about some of the first people to develop biomedical sciences that eventually became our field of medicine. I'm going to give you some dates just to help you kind of paint a timeline. I'm never going to expect you to remember dates unless I specifically say that, which I won't. Hippocrates. So Hippocrates lived about 460 to 375 BC. He was a Greek physician, and he is the generator of the Hippocratic Oath, which doctors take. So he's considered the father of medicine. He came up with this code of ethics for doctors. He's also one of the first people to kind of stop blaming the gods for disease. So you weren't diseased because you incurred the wrath of a deity, but more because of some other factor. Next we have Aristotle. So Aristotle lived from 384 to 322 BC, so they overlapped a little bit there. And he was one of the first people to write about anatomy and physiology, and he wrote this book on the parts of animals. And so in here he hypothesized that complex structures are actually built up of smaller, simpler ones, which is true. Claudius Galen, was the author of a very influential anatomy book. Unfortunately, his book was based on the dissection of animals, specifically pigs, which, while they're mammals, are not humans. At this time, in 130 to 200 AD, so this is a little later, people weren't allowed to dissect people. It was against the religion. But Galen was a physician to the Roman gladiators, so he was coming in contact with people who were injured, and then he was also dissecting pigs. And ironically, he actually warned that some of the anatomy in his book could be wrong, but the people kind of took his word as law and followed his descriptions. So a much later jump in time, we're going to jump kind of more to modern medicine. We have Vesalius. And he taught anatomy in Italy. And this is a time when we were finally able to have dissection of humans. The church would allow autopsies. This, however, was a time before embalming. So if you think about these anatomy labs, usually the professor would sit very far away, and it smelled really bad. And then the students would have to be very close to what was usually a rotting cadaver. In order to dissect it. William Harvey lived from 1578 to 1657, and he wrote a very small book about the physiology of circulation. And he was the first one to posit that blood circulates continuously, right? We know that blood is pumped by the heart and it circulates through the body. Up until this point, people had been basing their thoughts about blood on what Claudius Galen had written. And this had been, they thought that we needed to eat food so that the liver would turn this food into blood. And so that was why we had to continuously eat, so that we would keep making blood. And this seems ridiculous now. But at the time, Harvey was actually ridiculed for his idea that blood circulated continuously throughout the body. And that it didn't come from the liver, it actually came from somewhere else. That just kind of goes to show you how even a right hypothesis takes a little bit of time for people to get used to. Robert Hooke lived from 1635 to 1703, and he was the inventor of the compound microscope, which he got to view at a magnification of 30 times actual size. So this is a scope that has two lenses, and it was the first person to see and name cells. And he actually called them cellulae, which is a word that meant little cells, when he was looking at cork, which is from a tree. Antony von Leeuwenhoek developed a simple microscope. This one was one lens, but was able to see up to 200 times magnification. And what he did was he was looking at lake water, and he saw these teeny tiny microorganisms swimming around. And this was praised at first. It was very cool, but the popularity of microscopes died out a little bit after this because the resolution on the scopes was very bad. So in order to get the magnification very high, it was a very grainy image. It wasn't very clear. However, these two guys were the first to jump biology into the cellular level. Much later, after we had seen the improved use of microscopes, so Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann are both going to be in the 1800s. These are the first to come up with the tenets of the cell theory. So this is kind of taking us into modern day understanding of what cells are and how they function in the body. And so we now know that the cells are the small, simple structures, and they make up larger tissues, which make up larger organs. And it took a long time for these tenets to be accepted. Science doesn't always accept new things really quickly. So take a moment and pick two of these people and reflect on their contributions to the advancement of medicine.